Welcome back to Mad Medicine. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing eukaryotes. This is part 2 of our lecture series. We discussed the organelles in part 1, so I highly recommend you check that video out. If you want, please subscribe to our channel because your support really means a lot to us, and if you can, please disable ad block and watch these stupid ads that come on these videos. We know they're stupid, but it really allows us to be able to keep these lectures completely free so we don't have to charge you a single dime, and so that you don't have to go deeper into debt. And we really appreciate you doing that. So with that being said, let's dive right in. In this lecture, we're not going to be discussing the organelles. Like I said, we've already done that. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing everything else about the cell that you might not know about or you might have forgotten. And the main thing we're going to be discussing today is the cytoskeleton. So, a lot of people don't think much about the cytoskeleton. A lot of people think like, oh, you know what? There's a component of the cell called the cytoskeleton, which is just the rest of the cell, right? I don't need to think much about it. But that's not really the case because, as we're going to discuss in this lecture, the cytoskeleton is very freaking important, and it's something that you can get tested on across your career in medicine, not just at the beginner stage, but also as a physician. You need to know what is going on in the cytoskeleton, okay? Because a lot of disease concepts are related to the cytoskeleton malfunction, essentially. So, what is the function of the cytoskeleton? There are two main things you need to know. Essentially, the cytoskeleton is a component of the cell that provides a structure to the cell, and it helps maintain the shape of the cell. And a lot of people forget about that. We forget that the cytoskeleton actually is not just containing the rest of the components like organelles, it has a real function, okay? And it aids in the transportation of the materials around the cell. High yield, very high yield, you understand both of these concepts. Now I'm going to stop here for 1 second. I'm going to draw the cell right here. This is the cell. Okay, excuse my horrible drawing. Boom. Inside of the cell, you have certain organelles, like this right here. This is your nucleus, okay, and your nucleolus, and connected to the nucleus, you have something called your endoplasmic reticulum, okay, and then you're gonna have something called the Golgi apparatus. I'm gonna put, letters, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, and then you have these things right here. I'm sure you can figure what these are. These are your mitochondria. Okay, and what else do we have? We got these little tiny things with little components within them that break down a lot of the things in the cell, like, improper functioning components called lysosomes. Lysosomes are essentially going to have lysozymes, which are enzymes that break stuff down in there. And then you have these little tiny blebs which contain, material from the nucleus. Also, okay. All right, cool. So this covers a lot of the stuff you have in your cell, right? These are your organelles, things you need to know. Well, the important thing you have to understand is that a lot of people focus mainly on the organelles and they forget the rest of the actual space. This is not just fluid inside of the cell. A lot of people think that the cytoskeleton or the cytoplasm is just something like plasma, but it's not the case. The cytoskeleton is located in the cytoplasm. Okay? And the cytoplasm has fluid inside of it. It definitely has that. But there's a huge component called the cytoskeleton that's part of the cytoplasm. And the reason why this is important is because, like I said right here, not only does the cytoskeleton allow us to have the structure and the form of the cell may be maintained, it also plays an aid in transporting the materials around the cell. So if you think of it, the cell is like a city. Okay? So we'll call this Cell City. And Cell City has a mayor's office. What is the mayor's office? It is the nucleus. Okay? Nucleus. And the mayor sits in the nucleolus. Think of it that way. All right. Then you have a factory, a production factory. What is the factory? Think of it as the endoplasmic reticulum. They're producing, proteins, and they're going to be taking care of that. And then you have something called a post office. And what is the post office? That is the Golgi apparatus. Okay. All right. And then you have a power plant And what is the power plant? That's the mitochondria. And then finally, you have garbage men. So garbage men and women, this is the lysosomes / peroxisomes. All right, cool. Now, the one thing we're forgetting is that we need to have a highway system in a city, right? You have to have roads. So, what do you think is the highway system? You guessed it. The cytoskeleton is essentially the highway system of the cell. It allows a lot of things to happen. It not only keeps the structure of the cells intact, right, like we discussed already, it allows for transportation. So when these molecules right here, which are essentially coming off right of the nucleus, when they're coming off the Golgi apparatus to either be used inside of the cell or to go outside, they have to travel via the cytoskeleton. And that is because the cytoskeleton is what's allowing these materials, these components to move. Very, very important. Same with lysosomes and the peroxisomes, right? Because they sometimes have to go close to the material they need to destroy. So if this has to destroy this material, right, it is going to be migrated to the location and it will destroy that material and get rid of it. So, very, very important. The cytoskeleton is like the highway of the cell. Now, there are three main components. You have the intermediate filaments, microfilaments, and microtubules. All of these are high yield, which we're going to be discussing in this lecture. And this is what they look like under electron microscopy. These are what microfilaments look like. These are the microtubules, and they're called microtubules because they're microscopic tubules. And then these are your intermediate filaments, which we're going to discuss starting first. Intermediate filaments are important because they are a diverse group of filamentous proteins. And these proteins include keratin and desmin. And the main purpose of intermediate filaments is that they're involved in cell-to-cell adhesion as well as the maintenance of overall integrity of the cell. They're able to withstand a tremendous amount of tension, and that makes the cell more rigid and more structured. That's important because rigidity of a cell allows us to have structure. Okay, and when you have a structure of a cell maintained, that cell can combine with a bunch of other cells in that region, and you can go from cells all the way to tissues, and on a large scale aspect, this can become an organ. So, the intermediate filaments, very important for rigidity. They also help anchor the organelles, including the nucleus, to where they are, which is important because you don't want the nucleus and other organelles just floating around freely. You want them kind of controlled. Now, some of them you do, like lysosomes, can move around, and they need to be able to go somewhere to kill off or destroy a misfunctioning protein or something that shouldn't be there. But for the most part, organelles shouldn't be moving around. Otherwise, they will get damaged and the cell will get damaged. So intermediate filaments will play an important role in anchoring those components of the cell. And that's an intermediate filament. Pretty straightforward. Then you have microfilaments. Microfilaments are these solid polymerized rods of actin. And you've probably heard of actin before. Actin is very important. It plays a role in another part of our body, which we're going to discuss in a second. But the main function of the microfilament is that they're going to allow for protection of the cell. They're going to provide protection because they are resistant to fracture and pressure. They're able to maintain the structure but under a lot of force. Why would that be important? Or in what concept of the body is that important? Muscle contraction. You see, actin uses ATP along with the help of another protein called myosin in order to help our muscles contract, okay? So microfilaments are already playing an important role in our body across not just cells, but also in muscles themselves because they're able to allow for muscle contraction to occur properly. We're going to discuss this concept in deeper, deeper aspect down the road, but understand that it's the actin itself that's able to allow for muscle contraction along with the help of myosin. And why would that be important? Because it makes sense, right? Muscle contraction is a very forceful process. No matter what, it causes a lot of force. And if the cells aren't able to handle that amount of force, they would burst. They would be destroyed. But because of microfilaments, that does not happen. And they also play a role in cytokinesis. If you forgot what cytokinesis is, don't worry, I got you. Cytokinesis is the part of the cell cycle where the cell is forming the cleavage furrow, okay? That's where microfilaments are playing a role. Essentially, when the cell is getting ready to break off into two cells. So if this is the cell before, the cleavage furrow is forming right here. Okay, microfilaments play an important role in the formation of the cleavage furrow during mitosis. And then finally, we have microtubules, which some people argue might be the most important concept in the cytoskeleton you need to know. So we're going to spend a little bit more time here. I'm going to show you another picture, which is going to be very high yield for you to understand and know well. And I'm going to give you some tips about this down the road as well. So microtubules are hollow polymers of tubulin. Very simple to remember. Tubule, tubulin. Okay? I can't make it more simple than that. I can't give you another trick. So honestly, just memorize this. You're welcome. Okay, so they are hollow polymers. That's why they're called tubules, right? Because they look like they have a tube. Okay, that's what it is. Essentially, it's a hollow polymer of tubulin, which is essentially going to allow for the proteins to be moved. Okay, why is this important? Because the microtubules form the primary pathway along which the non-enzymatic proteins like kinesin and dynein are able to carry vesicles. If you don't remember, or if you don't recall what kinesin and dynein are, they're very important parts of the cell that essentially determine which way a protein is going. Okay, so these are the motor proteins. These are the proteins that are going to be allowing for the movement specifically. So what do I think of these motor proteins, kinesin and dynein to be? I think of them as taxis that function on the cytoskeleton, which is the highway, okay? Remember, I'm going to make this simple and relatable. So, kinesin is the protein that carries stuff away from the cell body. Okay? And dynein carries stuff towards the cell body. So essentially, their name is what lets us know which way a vesicle is going. Is it going away from the cell body, meaning towards the membrane? Or is it coming towards the cell body, meaning so it's going away from the membrane, but towards the cell? Remember this because this is something you can get tested on really easily. And microtubules are going to make up the modal structure of cilia and flagella. These two things are very high yield. Okay, cilia and flagella are very high yield, so we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about these because you will get tested on these. They play an important role in the body, not just, with sperm, because you might be thinking, okay, sperm have these components, but also in your lungs, you have cilia and flagella that you need to know about. So let's talk about these two components. So cilia are projections of the cell that primarily are involved with movement of material along the surface of the cell. Okay? So if you think about it, let's say you have a cell right here. You will have these little components called cilia on the surface of the cell. Okay? And they essentially allow for a product to move along the surface. All right? And then you have flagella. Let's talk about cilia in a second. We'll go to flagella in a second. But they line the respiratory tract, and the important reason why they line the respiratory tract is because they're involved in the movement of mucus. And this is kind of important, and I'm going to give you a little bit more understanding. The cilia in the respiratory tract are involved with the production and movement of mucus because, let's say you get something that goes down your throat, like a small speck of dust. That's normal. They can go down. Dust can go down your throat. It can go in your lungs, in the respiratory tract. That happens all the time. That happens to you, that happens to me. But if we didn't have a way to get that dust out of our lungs, we would be getting infections all the time. We'd be developing pneumonia and human beings would die off, but that doesn't happen because we have cilia in our respiratory tract and they're able to move that dust by combining it with mucus and moving it outside of the lungs, by moving it back up into our mouth, and then we breathe it out. Okay? That's why cilia are important in the body. That's one example. And if you just want to know a little bit more, this is called your mucociliary escalator. For those of you who just are interested. All right, so that's cilia. Let's talk about flagella. Flagella is a structure that is involved in the movement of the cell itself. And the classic example of flagella are sperm cells, right? The sperm cells are able to move because of the movement in the structure of the flagella. So I'm going to draw a sperm cell right here. Very memorable concept. Okay, so the sperm itself is moving. The flagella will cause the sperm to go forward. Okay, whereas cilia is not moving the cell, it is moving everything around the cell. The flagella is actually moving the cell. Now both of these components have a very important structure, and essentially it's called the 9+2 structure. They're composed of 9 doublets with 2 central microtubules. Okay, flagella and cilia are composed mainly of microtubules, but it's a 9+2 structure, so you have 9 doublets and 2 centralized microtubule pair. And this is what it looks like right here. This is what cilia and flagella look like under the electron microscope. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 doublets that are on the outside, and then 2 that are on the inside. Okay, so it's the 9+2 structure. Just so you know, this is 9 times 2 because they're doublets, so you have 18 microtubules on the outside, and then you only have 2 on the inside, so cilia and flagella have a grand total of 20 microtubules. So, with that being said, we've pretty much discussed everything you need to know about eukaryotic cells. Now, from part 1, we discussed organelles. Part 2, we have now discussed the cytoplasm and the cytoskeleton. I hope this was helpful. If it was, don't forget to subscribe to our channel because your support means a lot to us and it allows us to keep these lectures completely free for your educational purposes. If you want to see more lectures like this or more topics completely free without going deeper into debt, go visit our website www.madmedicine.org where you can find a bunch more educational content all for free.